Hey, boys and girls, welcome to day 2 in your content packet 5. And today we're going to get to the bottom of 2 of the simple machines that we talked about yesterday. And hopefully some of that vocabulary really sunk in because you're going to be hearing the words force today, effort, uh, work, load. Probably not going to talk a whole lot about gravity, but you're going to hear all those words that really, really matter, and you really, really need to know what they mean. So if you ever need to, pause the video, go back to yesterday's vocabulary, look it over, and refresh yourself on it so that when you hear these things, you know what I'm talking about. But we're going to start out on day 2, and we're going to start out with the first 2 simple machines. So go to your packet, and we're going to be in section 1. I'm going to go over to the digital notebook, and we're going to talk about the wedge and the lever. So let's go to this page, and we'll move on through it. Just a quick recap. Gravity is a powerful pulling force between objects. Effort is the amount of force that you actually apply. The load is the object you're trying to move. The force is the push or the pull that you're using to move the object. Remember, effort is how much of it you're using. And then work is when we use that force to actually move an object. So however much that object moved is how much work you've done. So today, we're going to get started in section 1 with the wedge and the lever. And we'll start off with the wedge. And you can look at the pictures while I read this to you. But a wedge is used to blank in between 2 objects to stop movement or blank them apart. So I know your brains are moving, your gears are moving, and you're trying to think about what words are going to fit in those blanks. And you can see, if we were in class, what I would ask is I'd ask you to look at all these pictures and I'd say, what do all of them have in common? And you might say, well, they might have a handle, or they might be made of metal, but not all of them are made of metal. And hopefully you would see that all of them actually have kind of a sharp edge on them. And that sharp edge is actually called the wedge. And that's how I remember it, because edge sounds like wedge. So if it has a sharp edge like that, it's probably a wedge. And wedges are used to push in between 2 objects to either stop movement, like a door stop, or split them apart. So 2 of these objects are used to split things apart. One of them is used to push in between objects to stop the movement. I'm sure you can guess which 2 are used to split them apart. That's the axe and the knife, okay? And then the door stop acts as a wedge to actually stop the door from moving. It actually fills the space up between the door and the floor so that it can't move. So wedges can be used either way. So that's the wedge. Now let's go over to the lever. A lever helps to blank, blank, or blank objects. Well, we could think of about 1,000,000 different words to put in those blank spaces. But here's what you're going to write. A lever is used to lift, turn, or move an object. So you can see those pictures down at the bottom, and there's 3 different kinds of levers, as you can see, class 1, class 2, and class 3. But all levers don't always necessarily do the same thing. Now, there's a very special component of a lever. All levers are made of the same things, the same parts. And those are a rigid beam, or a stiff, like a stick or a stiff rod, or some sort of hard, straight, stiff piece of whatever. We call that a beam. And there's also something called a fulcrum. And now the fulcrum doesn't always look the same. As you can look in these pictures, sometimes the fulcrum is a handle. Sometimes the fulcrum is a wheel, like on the wheelbarrow. And sometimes the fulcrum can just be something like a rock. or something that beam can move on. And a fulcrum, all a fulcrum is a point where the beam can move, can rotate. So on a spade or a shovel, like you see, the fulcrum is actually where your hand is. Your hand is what is turning, where that beam is turning. On the wheelbarrow, the fulcrum is the wheel because that's where the beam is moving. So anywhere it's rotating. I'm going to show you another example whenever we're finished up here. So we've talked about a wedge and a lever. Now what I want you to do is I want you to head to your packet and I want you to look at these pictures and I want you to label them wedge or lever. Those are your only two options, okay? So look at the pictures. Some of them are going to be really easy because you've seen them before already. But remember, a wedge is used to split and a lever is used for different kinds of things, either to turn or move or lift up an object. Okay, so be thinking of that. Keep looking at your notebook packet or your vocabulary while you're doing this. I'm going to pause it. Make sure you hit play whenever you're ready to go to the next section. Okay, so label those. We're going to go over them and then we'll move on. Okay, hopefully that wasn't too tricky for you. But let's go over what these are. So an axe, we've already talked about it. An axe has a sharp edge on it. So an axe is a wedge because it splits these two things. Whatever you're chopping, it splits them apart. However, an axe is also a lever because it has a handle. The handle is the lever. So if you're swinging an axe down, okay, that acts as a lever because you are moving that wedge at the very top. You're moving it down. So these actually work together. The wedge and the lever work together in an axe. Same with a knife too, because a knife has a handle. And anything that has a handle that makes the object longer is basically a lever. If you've ever heard of the word leverage, okay? Leverage is just length that helps you apply more force. So a knife is actually a wedge because it has a blade and it helps you cut through things to split them apart. But the handle acts as a lever because it makes it a little bit longer. Okay, so you can use it to chop down and you have a fulcrum. Remember, the fulcrum is the part where the lever is rotating or moving. So your hand is basically the fulcrum. Your wrist is basically the fulcrum because you are moving it with your wrist. Same with the axe. But let's talk about a nail. What do you think a nail would be? Does a nail help you turn something or move something? Or does it help you split into something? It actually is a wedge because it has kind of that pointy edge that helps you split down into an object. Now, it doesn't help you split it apart, but that's basically what you're doing. You're splitting these two things apart so the nail sticks in it, or whatever you're hammering to the object, to the board. So we've got axe, knife, and nails are all a wedge. Let's go down to the bottom three here. We've got a broom, a wrench, and a seesaw. So a broom. Does a broom help you cut something into pieces? No. It doesn't have a sharp edge. A broom, let me go grab my broom. I'm going to pause it for a second. Okay, so I've got my broom. Now, if you remember from earlier, a lever is made up of a beam and a fulcrum. So the beam in this case is the solid part. I can't bend it. It's stiff. It's nice and sturdy. Okay. The fulcrum is the place where the broom or the lever rotates. And as you can see right here on my hand, that's where this broom is rotating. Okay. It's not really moving up there, but it's moving everywhere else. Now this hand is my force. Okay. I am pushing and I am pulling every single time I'm moving this broom. And then where's my load? What am I trying to move? Well, I'm trying to move all the dirt that's on the floor. So that's my load. Okay, so we've got the load, we've got the force or the effort, we've got the fulcrum up here, and we've got the lever, okay, the beam. So those are the parts of a broom. That's what makes it a lever. What about a wrench? Let me go find a wrench. Okay, so I've got a wrench. Now, it's not the same as the wrench in your picture, just because I couldn't find the right size. So I have this adjustable wrench. But a wrench is used to latch on to a bolt or a nut or whatever you are trying to spin or turn, okay, to tighten or loosen up. So it's used to latch on, and then what do? You turn with it, okay? So you're turning to either loosen or tighten it up. Now, it's the same motion. It's the same motion whether you use the wrench or you try to use your fingers, but it's not always easy to loosen it up when you're just using your fingers. So we use this wrench to create what's called leverage. And again, like I said, leverage is just extra length that helps you apply more force to whatever you're trying to move. So a wrench is another lever. Now let's find the parts of the lever. Where is that beam? That straight, stiff beam. Okay, that's the handle right here. This is the part I apply my force to. Oops. Now the fulcrum is the part that spins. So the fulcrum is actually going to be whatever you are turning, whether that's a bolt or a nut or whatever you're trying to loosen or tighten. That's going to be your fulcrum. That's what it's spinning around, okay? Now my hand is obviously the force, and the load is whatever I am trying to move to take off or put on. Okay, the last example here is a seesaw. So this is either a wedge, remember, a wedge or a lever. But it's not trying to split two things apart, so it's not a wedge. So what makes it a lever? Well, we've got this kind of thing that it spins on in the middle, and then it either goes up or down, and if one side goes down, the other side goes up, and vice versa. So what makes this a lever? Well, we've got this rigid beam, okay, this beam, this straight, hard rod or beam or whatever you want to call it. And then we've got the thing that it spins on, which is the thing in the middle, and we call that the fulcrum. So I'm going to show you my example here. Okay, I am using a marker for my fulcrum, and I'm using a ruler for my rod. And this is a lever because whatever goes on one side, let's see, what do I have here? I've got my nut here. Okay, and then if I apply force to the other side, right here, if I apply force down, look what happens. This side goes up, and I can lift it up. Now, obviously, I could lift this nut up with my hand. Okay, it's not that heavy. But we use levers like this to lift things that are very, very heavy, or turn things that are very, very heavy, like a rock. Sometimes you might be trying to move a rock, I don't know, wherever. Maybe a farmer in the field so he can move his tractor through or plow it up. But he can't just pick it up and move it. So he has to use this sort of lever to stick this down, wedge it down in between the rock and the ground, and then use something like this to then apply force and pry it up and keep moving it and keep moving it and keep moving it. Okay, so these are all different kinds of levers. Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. I know it's confusing, but there's a bunch of different types of levers, and all of the components are kind of in different places depending on what type you have. But just remember what it's used for: to lift something, to move something, or to what else did we say? To lift something. Let's go back here. To lift something, to turn something, to move something. And a wedge is used to either push two things apart or to push in between them so that they don't move. Okay, to reduce the movement. So I'm going to pause it for a second while we take a look at section 3. Okay, section 3. We've got two things to kind of practice and review before we finish up for the day. The first thing is to answer the question on page 4 of the notebook packet. I'm going to show it to you. You're going to go into your actual notebook packet and choose this answer. So it says a lever helps to lift things. That's one purpose. Which picture is not a lever? So we've got this seesaw looking thing here. We've got a shovel. We've got this farmer trying to move this big box. And we've got this hammer coming down on this object to split a log apart. So which one is not a lever? Remember, a lever helps you lift things. Take a moment, just circle whatever object you think is not a lever, and then I'm going to tell you the answer. So if you remember from what we talked about, this object here is a lever because if you apply force going down, the other side goes up, which helps you lift something. A shovel is actually a wedge and a lever because you can shove it down into the earth, the ground, and lift up. And it helps you lift up objects or a pile of dirt or sand. This farmer or this worker is using a fulcrum to move this box, probably rotate it onto some sort of ramp to then lift it up. So he is trying to lift that up. But then this log is not being lifted. It's actually being split apart. And we know that the simple machine that splits things apart is a wedge. So that is your answer. Okay, practice number 2, and then you're done. You're going to go to find the Simple Machines page 2. I'm going to find it so I can show it to you. It looks like this. It has a person doing a job. It has a number 2 up here. And then it has a sentence and some place for you to write. You're going to read and answer numbers 1 and 6. Number 1 says this. What is the man doing with the crowbar? Which type of simple machine is he using? So take a look at what he's doing. Okay, he's trying to pry that bottom piece off of the rest of that. Okay, what simple machine would that be? And what's he trying to do? Now, you're only doing 2 today because one of them is a lever and one of them is a wedge. So don't get too confused because I only gave you what you already know. That's why you're only doing 2 today. So one of them is a lever, one of them is a wedge. Number 6 says, what is this man breaking apart? The hammer in his right hand is a lever. What type of simple machine is the chisel in his left hand? The part that's breaking things apart. So take a look at it, think about it. If you have questions, ask maybe to look up what a chisel is if you don't know what a chisel is or what a crowbar is, and look at some pictures maybe of what they are to think about what kind of simple machine they are. So hopefully those help you think about how these objects are used in our world and by workers. And if you have any questions or if you think you need any more help, ask me or ask an adult in your home so that you can really understand what these simple machines are. Tomorrow we're going to do the same thing. We're going to learn about 2 simple machines, the pulley and the inclined plane. So finish up your practice problems and come on back tomorrow to learn some more about simple machines. Bye, guys.